You know that feeling when you pour your heart, your savings, and literally years of planning into something? Something tangible, something real? For me, that something was wood. Not just any wood. I'm talking about a small forest's worth of quarter-sawn white oak and some truly exceptional figured walnut. This wasn't lumber I just picked up at the big box store. This was a serious investment, a small fortune I had sunk into the foundation of my next 5 years of work. I had $18,000 tied up in this pile, cash that could have bought a decent used car, but instead, it bought me the material for generational furniture. I remember the day it all arrived, the flatbed truck pulling up, the driver looking utterly perplexed at the sheer volume and quality of what he was delivering. It took 3 of us the better part of 2 days to carefully offload and stack it. If you're a woodworker, you know the process. It's not just a pile. It's a cathedral of lumber. Every board meticulously stickered, thin strips of wood placed strategically between layers to allow air to circulate perfectly. This is how you dry hardwood. This is how you achieve that perfect, stable moisture content that prevents warping, checking, and twisting years down the line. It was stacked tall, covered correctly, banded, weighted, and situated on my property, well back from the street. It was a monument to patience, dedication, and future craftsmanship. I walked out every evening just to look at it, maybe touch the grain on a few of the end pieces, anticipating the day it would be ready to mill. My neighbors? They've always been observational, small-town dynamics, you know? They watch who comes and goes. They comment on the color of your mailbox, but mostly, they leave you alone, except for Mrs. Henderson, 3 houses down, whose primary hobby is apparently the selective enforcement of neighborhood aesthetics. But even she hadn't said a peep. I figured the wood pile, while large, was neat, organized, and clearly commercial inventory, not garbage. It was a work in progress, and work is what I do here. Then came the red letter day. Not red letter in a good way, but stamped in aggressive, official crimson. I found it fluttering under a rock on my front porch, weighted down like a death sentence. The envelope felt too thin for the gravity of the contents. I tore it open right there on the stoop. The date on the violation was just 2 days prior. My eyes scanned the official city header, the fine print, the cold, impersonal legalese. And then I hit the violation code. Code 7.4b, accumulation of trash and debris on a residential lot. Trash, debris. I laughed, honestly. A loud, shocked, disbelieving bark of a laugh. This had to be a joke, a mistake. Some newbie code enforcement officer had clearly seen a large stack of wood and just defaulted to the most common violation they could find. I marched back out to the lumber, the $18,000 stack of white oak and figured walnut, and reread the official notice in the evening sun. I traced the fine print with my thumb. The penalty wasn't a warning, it was a 4-figure fine, payable immediately. And here's the true kicker, the line that instantly made my blood run cold. Failure to remit payment or correct the violation within 7 calendar days will result in forced removal and disposal of said materials, with additional costs billed to the property owner. 7 days. That stack had been seasoning for 9 months, and I had 7 days before the city could legally bring in a dumpster and just shred $18,000 of irreplaceable, specially sourced material and then bill me for the privilege. The initial shock immediately gave way to pure, unadulterated fury. I grabbed my phone and started dialing the number listed on the notice. It went straight to a generic city voicemail system. I tried the main city hall line. Transferred again, then eventually back to a different voicemail box for the Department of Public Works. It was 4:45 p.m. Everyone was already gone. They drop this bombshell on your life and then clock out. The bureaucracy was already fighting back, hiding behind automated messages and the comforting ring of 5 o'clock. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe there's a rule I missed about height? No, it's under the maximum allowed for temporary structures. Maybe proximity to the property line? Checked that months ago, I was well clear. The only possible explanation was the single, infuriating, defining word, trash. I took 100 photos from every conceivable angle, zooming in on the perfect grain, the meticulously uniform stickering, the weatherproof cover. Does trash look like this? Does trash carry a market value higher than the average person's annual salary? I spent the next hour meticulously going over every inch of the violation notice again. That's when I noticed something subtle, something tucked away in the very bottom corner, outside the main text box. A small, almost illegible handwritten note in a different ink, a different hand, underneath the printed name of the issuing officer. It wasn't a signature. It was a name, hastily scrawled, almost scratched out. H. Taylor. I didn't know any H. Taylor in code enforcement. In fact, the name printed on the document was J. Richards. Why would someone else scribble their initials on an official document? I started thinking about Mrs. Henderson again, and that feeling in my gut solidified. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't an oblivious civil servant making a simple mistake. This felt personal. And if it was personal, it meant someone had deliberately lied to the city, called my premium inventory trash, and initiated this entire sequence of legal maneuvers to force me to destroy my own life's work. The clock was ticking, the fine was due, and suddenly, the battle wasn't just against paperwork. It was against a specific, unknown enemy who had just blindsided me with an $18,000 punch to the gut. I needed to find out who H. Taylor was, and I needed to do it before the city came with the chipper. What followed next was a desperate, sleepless night of digging, starting with that cryptic name and the realization that my fate hung entirely on a 7-day window. Sleep was a joke that night. I was running on fumes and pure adrenaline, staring at my computer screen. The city's website was a labyrinth, a bureaucratic monstrosity designed to confuse and repel. I searched every permutation of H. Taylor I could think of. Code enforcement? Nothing. Public works? No match. I expanded the search to LinkedIn, Facebook, and local business registries. And that's when the first real twist hit. H. Taylor wasn't a code enforcement officer. H. Taylor was Harrison Taylor, a name I recognized instantly, the name of a high-end, bespoke furniture designer operating 3 towns over. My immediate reaction was disbelief. Why would a competitor, someone who should appreciate the value of high-quality, air-dried lumber, be involved in this petty, destructive act? Harrison Taylor and I weren't friends, but we ran in the same small circles. We sourced from the same, very few specialized sawmills. In fact, I knew for a fact that Harrison had been trying to get his hands on a batch of quarter-sawn white oak exactly like mine for months. He had even tried to buy some of my inventory last year, offering a price that I politely declined, knowing its true value. Was this really about jealousy? Was he trying to take me out of the running for a massive contract? Or was he trying to somehow force the wood to be seized so he could buy it cheap at a city auction? The thought of the latter was even more sickening. The next morning, I was at City Hall precisely at 8 a.m., my violation notice clutched in my hand like a shield and a weapon all at once. I sidestepped the automated phone system and went straight to the source. The woman at the code enforcement window, a perpetually weary-looking clerk named Janice, barely looked up. I presented the notice and asked as calmly as I could why $18,000 worth of carefully stacked stickered hardwood was categorized as trash. Janice's answer was delivered with the dull neutrality of a robot. The citation was filed based on a detailed citizen complaint, sir. The officer on duty confirmed the presence of large quantities of debris inconsistent with approved lot use. It's a valid citation. I pressed her on the specifics. What specific debris? I have photos. This is grade A lumber. It's clearly stickered and covered. It's an asset, not refuse. She sighed, annoyed that I was disrupting the usual flow of dog license renewals. She pulled up the file on her screen, and that's when I saw it. The complaint wasn't just a checkbox on a form. It included an attached PDF, not just citing trash, but specifically alleging improperly stored lumber attracting vermin and creating unsanitary standing water risks. My mind raced. Unsanitary? Standing water? That was a blatant, calculated lie designed to escalate the violation from a simple visual blight to a public health hazard. Whoever filed this complaint knew the codes. They knew exactly which buttons to push to accelerate the process and shorten the compliance window. This was Harrison Taylor's level of precision, a meticulous attack hidden behind the veil of neighborly concern. I pointed to the scrawled H. Taylor on my copy. I need to know if J. Richards was the officer who issued this, or if an H. Taylor was involved in the site visit. Janice's eyes flickered down to the note. She looked uncomfortable. Sir, I can only confirm the name on the citation is Officer Richards. Any other notes are internal and not for public disclosure. She was stonewalling. This confirmed my suspicion. H. Taylor had either accompanied the officer or, more likely, delivered the fabricated evidence directly to the Code Enforcement Office, bypassing the standard anonymous reporting system to ensure the citation was issued quickly and harshly. Feeling the cold grip of that 7-day deadline, I knew I couldn't fight this alone. I immediately drove to see Alan Stern, a land use attorney I had used years ago for a zoning dispute. Alan listened, rubbing his temples as I laid out the whole story. The $18,000 valuation, the stickering process, the fabricated vermin claim, and the suspicious Harrison-Taylor connection. Alan was blunt. Look, we can fight the substance of the violation. It's clearly not trash. But the city doesn't care about the market value of your lumber right now. They care about their process. You're past the warning stage, you're at the forced removal stage. The process says, pay the fine or it gets destroyed. He pulled a pad towards him and started sketching out the horrifying options. If you refuse to pay, the city will move on day 8. The cost of their disposal crew will be added to your property tax bill, and your $18,000 worth of wood will be wood chips. Your only path to saving the physical wood in the short term is to pay the fine. But then came the devastating caveat. If you pay the fine, it's an implicit admission of guilt for the accumulation of trash violation. It makes our subsequent civil lawsuit against the city or against Taylor for malicious complaint infinitely harder. We have to prove a deliberate abuse of process, but you'll have already validated their premise by writing the check. I was cornered. Pay the fine, admit my cherished hardwood was garbage, and fight a much harder legal battle to recover the money and reputation later, or stand on principle, refuse to pay, and watch $18,000 turn into mulch by the end of the week. Alan leaned back. We need a temporary injunction, but that takes days, maybe weeks, and we're on a 7-day fuse. You need to buy time, and right now, the only currency the city accepts is cash. He suggested a massive, non-refundable filing fee just to argue the violation, an option that was almost as painful as the fine itself. I drove away from Alan's office, the weight of the situation crushing me. The fine was $3,200, $3,200, just to pause the city's execution order on my wood. I had to decide by the end of the next day, because if I missed the payment window, even a lawyer couldn't help me. The enemy wasn't the city. It was Harrison-Taylor, who was leveraging the city's bureaucracy as a weapon. And I had to find a way to dismantle that weapon without sacrificing my life savings in Hardwood. I needed proof, and I needed it fast. I had just 6 days left. Alan's warning about paying the fine, the implicit admission that my $18,000 inventory was garbage, lodged itself in my throat like a shard of dry wood. I couldn't do it. The cost wasn't just the $3,200, it was the precedent, the validation of a lie. I decided to gamble. I had 6 days left. I would spend the first 2 days finding the smoking gun that proved Harrison-Taylor's malicious intent. If I failed, I would pay the fine on the morning of day 3 and start the long, ugly lawsuit. But I wasn't going to let him win this clean. I pulled up the address for Harrison-Taylor's custom shop. It was a beautiful setup, all reclaimed brick and oversized windows, the kind of place that screamed prestige and high-margin clients. I drove there late that afternoon, not planning a confrontation, but a reconnaissance. I parked a block away and watched. His lot was immaculate, almost sterile. There were no messy, towering stacks of drying lumber. Everything was either inside his climate-controlled shop or covered meticulously in an opaque tent, completely hidden from public view. He had learned how to play the local zoning game, or perhaps he just had the capital to avoid it entirely. As I watched, a delivery van pulled up, not lumber, but custom hardware. I saw Harrison himself emerge, impeccably dressed, shaking the delivery guy's hand with exaggerated warmth. He looked confident, successful, completely unbothered. It was the face of a man who had just launched a $3,200 torpedo at a competitor and was expecting it to sink without a trace. The sight fueled my anger. I knew a direct confrontation would be useless. He'd simply deny everything and get his own lawyer involved. So I tried a different angle. I called his shop the next morning, masking my voice slightly, asking for a consultation on a fictional, massive custom dining table project, the kind that would require vast amounts of specialty white oak. Harrison answered the phone himself, all charm and professional courtesy. I asked him specifically about his current stock of quarter-sawn white oak. There was a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation on the line. Quarter-sawn? It's a tough market right now, he chuckled, the sound grating on my nerves. I'm always sourcing, but premium stock, properly dried, that's almost impossible to find locally. I have a few smaller pieces, but nothing for a truly large commission. If you know anyone with a substantial cache of inventory, you should grab it fast, because it won't last. His comment, "It won't last," felt like a direct threat, a chillingly veiled reference to my impending demolition date. He was testing the waters, perhaps checking if the wood had already been seized. I ended the call quickly, my suspicions elevated to certainty. He wanted my wood, and he was using the city to get it off my lot. But wanting it and reporting it are one thing. Staging the violation is another. And that was the key to saving my wood and defeating him legally. I drove back home, ignoring the pit in my stomach, and marched straight back to the lumber stack. I was looking for something, anything, that proved the unsanitary standing water claim was a setup. I started at the base, where the wood rested on concrete blocks. The stacking was textbook: blocks, heavy sleepers, and then the stickered lumber. My drainage was perfect. The ground sloped away from the stack. There was no natural way for water to pool underneath the center, especially in the dry weather we'd been having. I got down on my hands and knees, running my hand along the edge of the bottom layer of wood. That's when I felt it. Near one corner, the corner closest to the neighboring property line, one of the thick wooden sleepers had been subtly pulled out of alignment. Just a half-inch shift, but enough. Underneath that slightly displaced sleeper, someone had shoved a small flat stone about the size of a cigarette pack. It wasn't natural debris. It was placed. That small stone created a microscopic depression in the ground cover, an area where water could pool, even if only for a brief period after a light rain, and remain long enough to satisfy a complaint about standing water risks for a photo. It was a brilliant, malicious little detail, the perfect, tiny, fabricated piece of evidence. As I knelt there, scraping the stone out, I also noticed something else, a faint, barely visible track on the damp ground nearby. It wasn't the heavy tread of my work boots, it was a more streamlined print, the expensive, narrow sole of a dress shoe or a nice, casual loafer, exactly the kind of footwear Harrison Taylor was wearing in his immaculate shop lot. I immediately called Alan. I described the placed stone and the shifted sleeper. Alan, he staged it. He didn't just call it in. He trespassed and engineered the violation to meet the criteria for accelerated removal. Alan was quiet for a long moment. That's compelling, but it's still circumstantial. We can argue a malicious complaint, but you need an eyewitness, a camera feed, or a direct link. You've got a loose rock and a suspicion. His voice was heavy. Look, we have 4 days left. We are dangerously close to the point of no return. You have to decide. Do you pay the $3,200 to secure the wood, or do you stand firm and risk losing $18,000 on the chance we can nail him in the next 72 hours? I refused to give in. I had the proof of malice, even if the lawyer didn't fully believe it yet. I needed something concrete. I needed a witness who saw Harrison Taylor near my stack. I hung up with Alan, the final deadline looming like a physical weight, and turned my focus to the only person who might have seen something, Mrs. Henderson. I had dismissed her initially, but Harrison's operation was smooth. He wouldn't have done this in broad daylight, but if he came in the dead of night, maybe her porch light or her perpetual neighborhood watch had caught a glimpse. I grabbed my car keys, knowing that the next conversation was the most critical yet. The battle for my lumber was about to move from the bureaucracy to the neighborhood. The sun was dropping fast, painting the western sky in hues of angry orange, and I had just 2 days left before I risked a $3,200 fine or a complete demolition. I drove straight to Mrs. Henderson's house. I swallowed my pride. knowing that this was my last best chance at finding an eyewitness to Harrison Taylor's trespass. Mrs. Henderson answered the door looking like she'd just finished a shift overseeing the morality of the entire neighborhood. Perfectly pressed slacks, hair sprayed into an impenetrable helmet, and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Henderson," I started, keeping my voice low and respectful. "I know you didn't approve of the lumber, and I understand why you might have called the city, but I need you to understand something critical. The city fine was not because the wood was untidy. It was based on a malicious false report from an outsider trying to destroy my business." She stiffened immediately. "I never called the city, young man. I may have considered it, but I believe in talking to a person first. I don't use the police state to enforce my yard standards." This was a genuine shock. I had misjudged her completely. She wasn't the antagonist. She was just a stern observer. I apologized immediately and explained the twist. The cryptic H. Taylor, and the evidence of tampering, the small stone placed to create fake standing water. I showed her the small stone in my hand. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger at me, but in focused suspicion. Her whole demeanor shifted from defensive busybody to investigative partner. "Someone came onto your property and staged that? That is outrageous. And you say it was a competitor?" She took the copy of the citation I offered and stared at the handwritten H. Taylor. "Mrs. Henderson, you're the eyes of this street. You know every car, every dog walker. Did you see anyone out of the ordinary late last week, maybe Thursday or Friday night? Someone who looked like they didn't belong, maybe lingering by the stack?" She tapped her lip, thinking hard. "Wait a minute. Thursday night? My insomnia was acting up. Around midnight, I was watching the late news. My living room window faces the street, and I happened to glance out. There was a car parked 3 houses down, near the corner, the one that usually has the silver pickup. This wasn't a pickup. It was a very dark, expensive-looking SUV, a black, sleek one, something European, completely out of place. It idled there for maybe 20 minutes. I remember thinking it was odd. Too nice a car to be scouting for trouble, but too late to be visiting anyone. I felt a surge of adrenaline so powerful my hands started shaking. I knew Harrison Taylor drove a high-end, obsidian black Mercedes SUV. It was his signature vehicle. "Did you, by any chance, notice the license plate?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "No, darling. I'm not that nosy," she said, giving me a dry look. "But I remember a detail. The driver got out for just a minute. He was wearing dark clothes, but I clearly saw he was very tall, and he walked with that precise stride. He walked down your side of the street, then came back and drove off quickly. A precise stride. Harrison Taylor had the unmistakable stiff gait of someone who spent all day bending over intricate wood joinery. It wasn't definitive, but it was a solid piece of evidence placing his vehicle near my lot at the exact time the staging likely happened. I thanked her profusely, promising to keep her out of the official proceedings unless absolutely necessary. I immediately called Alan and relayed the new information, the confirmed physical tampering, and the credible witness placing Taylor's high-end vehicle near the scene at the time of the trespass. Alan was genuinely energized. "Okay, this is what we needed for the civil case, a foundation for malicious prosecution and trespass. We can now file a motion with the court demanding they subpoena his vehicle's GPS records for that night." This is a massive break. But then, the high wore off as Alan turned back to the pressing matter, the demolition deadline. "Look, we can start that subpoena process now, but it takes time. The court doesn't move at your speed. We still have the abatement order hanging over us. Proving he's a criminal later doesn't save your wood now." As he was speaking, my doorbell rang, followed by the heavy thud of certified mail hitting the floor. I excused myself, hung up with Alan, and snatched the envelope. I knew instantly it wasn't good. The seal was heavier, the envelope thicker. This wasn't just a fine notice. It was a formal order of abatement and immediate removal from the Public Works Department, citing Code 7.4b, and, critically, Code 9.1.a, Public Health Hazard. The language was colder, harsher. It stated that the site had been re-inspected on the day after I found the place stone, confirming the persistence of the standing water and vermin risk. Taylor hadn't just reported me once. He had followed up, calling the city back, complaining again, forcing a reinspection just to ensure the process moved at lightning speed. Then came the devastating paragraph, the one that made my knees buckle. Due to the heightened risk profile and repeated non-compliance, the compliance window has been accelerated. Public works crews are scheduled to execute the removal and disposal on Day 5 at 8 a.m. Day 5. That was tomorrow. Harrison Taylor's malicious attack wasn't just a financial threat. It was a full-scale assault that had shaved 2 full days off my legal defense time. I had less than 16 hours until the bulldozers arrived to turn $18,000 of perfectly dried, custom hardwood into landfill filler. My window to file an injunction had just slammed shut. I didn't have time to subpoena GPS records. I didn't have time to argue the fine. I had only one desperate option left: a race against the sunrise, a final physical act of defiance that might save my life's work. The game was no longer legal, it was logistical. 16 hours. That's all the time Harrison Taylor and the slow churn of city bureaucracy had afforded me before the city dump trucks and chippers arrived to claim my $18,000 investment. The order of abatement was explicit: 8 a.m. tomorrow. My lawyer, Alan, confirmed it. A public health hazard order trumps a standard fine dispute. He said filing a hasty, last-minute injunction motion tonight would be a long shot, likely denied, and would only cost me more money I desperately needed to fight the real war. The legal options were gone. The only way to win this battle was to physically remove the object of the violation from the property before the deadline. Moving $18,000 worth of dense, air-drying hardwood is not a job for one man, certainly not in the dead of night. We're talking about thousands of pounds of material, meticulously stacked, heavy with the moisture content of perfectly seasoned timber. Every piece needed to be handled carefully so as not to damage the crucial edges or cause any twisting. I called the only person I knew I could trust implicitly, my friend, Mark. Mark runs a small construction outfit and, crucially, owes no favors to Harrison Taylor. Mark didn't hesitate. 8,000 pounds of oak by dawn? Impossible. But we'll make it less impossible. I'll meet you in an hour. Forget the big rental trucks. We need low profile and fast. Get a U-Haul van, the smallest one they have that can take the weight, and grab every moving blanket and strap you own. We work in the dark, and we move silent. By 11:30 p.m., the mission was underway. The U-Haul was parked on the darkest side of the lot, shrouded by some overgrown shrubbery. Mark brought his own tools, a couple of industrial-grade pallet jacks we weren't supposed to use on rough ground, and a powerful sense of grim determination. The work was brutal, silent, and heartbreakingly slow. We had to dismantle the cathedral of lumber board by board. The silence was the worst part. Every grunt of effort, every scraped piece of wood, every creak of the U-Haul ramp seemed amplified 100 times in the quiet suburban night. We worked in the weak beam of a single headlamp, focusing solely on the movement. Each board of the quarter-sawn oak felt like lead. We had to meticulously unsticker each layer, wrap the premium pieces in blankets, and carefully load them, ensuring the stack didn't shift in the poorly sprung U-Haul. The walnut was the worst, thick, heavy, and worth a king's ransom. About 2 hours into the moving process, just as the first third of the stack was secured, the tension spiked. A car, a big, imposing sedan, drove past my house incredibly slowly. I mean creeping slowly. Its headlights, which should have been blinding, dimmed just as it reached my driveway. The car paused, its engine barely idling, for what felt like 5 full minutes. It wasn't a patrol car. There was no light bar, no city logo, but I felt eyes on me. Mark and I froze, half bent under the weight of a thick 8-foot slab of oak. We stood perfectly still, hidden by the shadows of the lumber stack itself. When the car finally pulled away, Mark whispered, "That wasn't a neighbor, man. That was reconnaissance." I hadn't needed him to say it. The expensive lines of the car, the patient, observing pause, it was too professional. Harrison Taylor wasn't just waiting for the demolition, he was babysitting the execution. He wanted to make sure I didn't pull a fast one. The suspicion turned into cold, hard certainty. He knew I was running out of time, and he wanted to witness the failure. That chilling encounter poured fresh adrenaline into my veins. We went from careful and deliberate to desperate and reckless. We started dragging the smaller, lower-value boards, sacrificing care for speed. The pallet jacks groaned under the uneven weight, and the stickering wood, the pieces used to separate the layers, flew everywhere. My hands were raw and blistered, my back screaming, but I couldn't stop. Every time I paused, I looked at my watch. 3 a.m., 4 a.m. The time was dissolving. At 5:30 a.m., just as the sky was beginning to turn a sickly pre-dawn gray, we hit the last section, the very bottom layers of the walnut. These were the largest, thickest pieces, compressed by the weight of everything above them. It took everything we had, leveraging 2 crowbars and the pallet jack working at an impossible angle, just to slide them onto the ramp. The U-Haul was packed so tight the doors were difficult to close. But we had done it. Every single piece of lumber, every single cent of that $18,000 investment was off the lot and safe, temporarily stored in a dusty, dark, and thankfully empty storage unit Mark owned across town. We pulled out of the driveway at 6:15 a.m. As we drove away, I looked back at my property. The lot was empty. There was only the scattered debris of the stickering wood we didn't have time to clean up and the faint, unsettling depression in the dirt where the monument to my future once stood. The physical battle was won, but the clock was still ticking on Harrison Taylor's victory lap. I dropped Mark off, thanked him with a tired embrace, and then after parking the U-Haul, I raced back home. I knew what I had to do next. I needed to be waiting for the city crew. I needed to see the look on their faces when they realized the trash they were sent to haul away was gone. And I needed to make sure Harrison Taylor knew with absolute certainty that he hadn't won. The final, most satisfying twist of this whole terrible ordeal was about to play out on my empty lawn. The sound of heavy diesel engines was already rumbling faintly in the distance. The show was about to start. I was standing on my empty front lawn at 7:58 a.m., exhausted, my back seizing up from the night's impossible labor, but feeling an exhilarating calm. I had a cup of stale coffee in my hand, and my phone recording everything on a tripod tucked discreetly into a rosebush. Precisely at 8:00 a.m., the convoy arrived. A massive diesel fume-belching dump truck, a tow-behind chipper unit, and a standard city sedan. Out of the sedan stepped Officer J. Richards, the name printed on the original violation, looking stressed and professional. Richards walked onto the lot, scanned the area where the $18,000 monument of wood had stood for 9 months, and stopped dead. His face, initially set in the stern mask of bureaucratic duty, dissolved into utter confusion. "Where is the material?" he demanded, looking at the 2 men waiting by the chipper. The abatement order was clear. I stepped forward. "Morning, Officer Richards. The material cited in your order of abatement, the lumber, is no longer present on the lot. The violation has been corrected. The alleged trash has been removed." Richards pulled out his clipboard, flipping through pages, clearly irritated by the disruption to his morning schedule. "The code requires removal and proper disposal. You must show proof of disposal." I moved my personal inventory to a private, climate-controlled storage facility across town, I explained, maintaining a tone of calm professionalism. "It's not trash, officer. It's $18,000 worth of premium, stickered, air-drying white oak and walnut. It's an asset, and I moved it to save it from being mistakenly destroyed by your department, based on a malicious, false complaint." He squinted at me, his authority suddenly feeling flimsy. "Sir, a complaint was filed and confirmed by a code enforcement officer. It was confirmed that there was a risk of standing water," I countered, pointing to the spot where I had found the rock. "A risk that was intentionally created by the person who filed the malicious report. I found this." I held up the small, flat stone I had pocketed, shoved under a sleeper to create a depression. "The person who filed that complaint didn't want the wood moved. He wanted it destroyed." I then showed him the H. Taylor initials on the copy of the citation, highlighting how his name wasn't the signature. Richards looked genuinely uncomfortable. The whole situation was clearly more complicated than a simple call to haul trash. He knew the accelerated timeline was unusual. He looked at the empty lot. Legally, the materials were gone. The trash was no longer on the lot. He had no grounds for removal or demolition. With a tired shake of his head, he told his crew to pack up and pulled the sedan away, muttering about having to file a new report about an unforeseen abatement. I watched them go, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The silence returned, peaceful and victorious, but the final twist was yet to come. As the city vehicle's tail lights faded, another vehicle pulled up and stopped abruptly. It was the obsidian black Mercedes SUV, Harrison Taylor. He stepped out, dressed in a custom suit, his face contorted in an expression of satisfied anticipation that quickly melted into utter, stunned disbelief as he took in the scene. Me standing there, alive, well, and the lot completely empty. He rushed toward me, his precise gait turning into an angry stomp. "What in the hell happened here? Where is it?" I told them. "I spoke to the department yesterday. They assured me the abatement was finalized for 8 a.m. "It was finalized, Harrison," I said, my voice steady, savoring the moment. "And the violation was abated. I moved my inventory." He scoffed, his face turning an unhealthy shade of red. "You moved 10,000 pounds of wood in one night? That's impossible." "No, you're bluffing. You probably just hid the top layer." He looked around frantically. "It's all gone. Every last piece of that $18,000 investment. And by the way, Officer Richards seemed very interested in the fact that the standing water complaint required a carefully placed stone." I leaned in, my voice dropping. "And Mrs. Henderson, 3 doors down? She's a lovely woman. She also happens to remember seeing a very expensive black European SUV parked near my lot right around midnight last Thursday." His composure shattered. The realization that I had his name, his motive, the proof of tampering, and a witness hit him like a physical blow. "You can't prove anything. It's all circumstantial," he hissed, his voice trembling. "Maybe for the city, yes, but Alan Stern, my lawyer, just filed a civil suit this morning. Not for the $3,200 fine, but for malicious complaint, trespass, and interference with commerce. And as a courtesy, we filed a temporary restraining order freezing your ability to bid on any municipal or state contracts until the matter of your ethics is settled." That was the knockout punch. The public contracts were his lifeblood. I knew they were worth 10 times more than the $18K wood he tried to destroy. The destruction of my lumber would have been his minor victory. The threat to his entire livelihood was my major one. He stood there, speechless, defeated, realizing his attempt at a petty, destructive shortcut had just cost him his reputation and his future. I watched him turn and stumble back to his SUV, his expensive shoes kicking up the same dust where his planted stone once sat. The city's $3,200 fine? We'll argue that for the next 6 months and probably win. But the wood is safe. And the real victory wasn't saving the lumber. It was proving that genuine work, honest craftsmanship, and a few sleepless nights can always beat malicious greed and bureaucratic loopholes. The whole ordeal was a nasty, expensive reminder. When you build a business on quality, you build it on something solid. Unlike Harrison Taylor's career, which just went through the chipper. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have $18,000 worth of work to get back to.